Hey guys, it's Sleepy Reader. I've been wanting for a while to make a video about my thoughts about Marvel now. I have in fact been reading a lot of Marvel, although I don't discuss it too often in my videos because a lot of it comes through mail subscriptions from Marvel Comics themselves, and so I get my comics a few weeks late, and I've kept putting off talking about them. I get about 11 comics through subscriptions, and with many of them double shipping, that's been a lot of comics. So I do have a lot of thoughts on Marvel now, and I think what I'll probably end up doing is a series of videos about Marvel now, to cover the whole thing but not make each video go on too long. I do wonder, I guess, are Daredevil and Hawkeye part of Marvel now? I mean, those are two of my most favorite Marvel books at the moment. But I do cover those in my regular videos, so I'm not really going to talk about them here, except probably in passing. But as you can see, I've got a lot of things that I picked up, some in just single issues, some I'm getting very regularly. And part of my thing with Marvel is Marvel was always my favorite comic book company. When I started reading comics in the 70s, when I was a very intense reader of comics in the 80s, and then in the 90s I slowly stopped reading them, and I was more into things like Vertigo, and I liked some of the somewhat smaller companies like Valiant and such, although I still read some Marvel. And then probably by the late 90s and early 2000s I was reading very little Marvel, just sort of popping in now and then to check out certain things. I read Civil War, I read some Brian Michael Bendis stuff here and there, some other things, but just not a regular follower of what was going on in Marvel. So Marvel Now has... I was already starting to try to get back into Marvel before Marvel Now, but Marvel Now has given me a lot of food for thought. The New 52 kind of, just by chance, ended up making DC kind of the comic book company that I read the most of. But anyway, so why don't I start by discussing SpiderMan. I bought the first two issues of the Superior Spider-Man. I read another issue digitally that someone gave to me, and I've enjoyed it, but it wasn't one of the ones that I thought in advance to subscribe to, and I don't like it enough to pay $4.90 or $4 for, especially several times a month. It's probably be something I'll look at again in trades. I think Dan Slott, the writer of the Superior Spider-Man, does a lot of interesting things, things that are upsetting people sometimes, and maybe sometimes he goes for kind of the cheaper joke or what have you, but it's all in good fun. But for me, there is something kind of odd about... I mean, in a way, it's really cool to have this famous villain of Spider-Man, and I always liked Dr. Octopus as a villain. I mean, he's pretty over-the-top fun. Have him become Spider-Man, and but as this has been going on, what's bothered me about it is just this. I'm sure it'll turn out in the end it'll go very wrong for Otto Octavius, and I think it already is, from what I heard about issue 4, I think, or was it issue 5? Maybe issue 5, whatever the most recent issue is, where he started using a gun. But we have a lot of stuff about how he does things more efficiently than Peter Parker, and all this stuff that he does so great. And really, was Otto Octavius ever that great? I mean, pretty much he screwed up every time, and Spider-Man defeated him every time. So, obviously, on many levels, Peter Parker is superior to Otto Octavius. Unless the implication is it's just Spider-Man's powers that made him better than Otto Octavius, and with Spider-Man-like powers, Otto Octavius is better than Spider-Man. I just have a lot of trouble with that. It kind of brings Peter Parker down a few pegs. I think, another thing I think I've said other times, or maybe I've just said to people personally, is that Spider-Man will never, I think Spider-Man will never really be my hero, because I liked the Peter Parker that I read mostly in reprints, in the John Romita days and the Steve Ditko days, and basically as a high schooler and a college student. And when he got beyond college and started to have a real life and everything, it just took something away from me. Maybe that's where I'm being an old fogey, and I've got to get over it. That's why it's been sort of easier for me to get onto DC, because I don't have these strong childhood associations with it. But it does sort of increase my discomfort or my distance from Spider-Man, the implication that he's such a flawed hero that he's not as good of a hero as Otto Octavius could be, until, of course, Octavius's evil side asserts itself, I suppose. Anyway, and that may be setting a theme in a certain way for a lot of what I feel about Marvel now. But I'll try to develop that more as I go along. So I will try to look at individual issues, and then also try to spin out a little larger picture in terms of my reading of these things. If I could just go with it, and I could definitely just go with it. I'll probably read this stuff in trades eventually. I enjoy the ghost of Peter Parker, and it may be used a little heavy-handedly, but another thing which I think Slott recognizes is Spider-Man as the entry-level comic book at Marvel. So he keeps it at a level that you can pick up on whatever issue you jump onto, and you can just kind of get what's going on. On the other hand, there are certain touches of things that that you might have to be an older reader to completely pick up on, about Octavius using Parker's fantasies for his own personal purposes, or Parker's memories for his own personal fantasies. And I certainly loved the art of Brian Stegman. The art that I've seen of Kamikoli or whatever seemed less Spider-Man-ish to me. It seemed heavier, and Spider-Man just seems to me to need to kind of float on air and that kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, so Spider-Man is definitely an interesting comic book right now. And I hear people say that Dan Slott was a lot better before, or at least some people. And I believe that, but I still enjoyed what I did read. And Captain America, back when I was 8 or 9, the second comic book that I ever got was Captain America and the Falcon comic book. So I have a really strong kind of childhood feeling for him. Although now that I think about it, he maybe was never Marvel's strongest character, except for the whole fish out of water thing. And here in Marvel Now, Rick Remender has taken a radical turn by sending Captain America off to another dimension and basically making him completely a fish out of water. He's not even in a world of humans. He's in a world sort of, to some degree, created by Armin Zola. And I've been enjoying it, except for each issue has these flashbacks to Steve Rogers' childhood. Let me see if I can find it. Well, there's one right there of his abusive father at the beginning in the first issue, and done in a different illustration style, a little closer to Kick-Ass by John Romita than the rest of the Captain America. So I like John Romita's artwork a lot in the sort of science fiction parts of it, but I don't enjoy the depression parts of it. And the whole depression thing seems to be done as a kind of, Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens kind of story, with evil children and good saintly children, and it feels very heavy-handed to me, and I don't believe at all that the Depression was like this. I mean, I'm sure some awful things happened to some people in the Depression, but a lot of the Depression, from what my grandparents tell me, was people coming together and helping each other out in desperate times, and that sort of thing. But anyway, it's more just the heavy-handed tone of these flashbacks, and I really don't see what they tell us about Steve Rogers, or it doesn't yet, as of yet. Maybe it will all come together, but as of yet, it doesn't come together to me as being this is a logical childhood for Steve Rogers to make him the person he became. But then, who is this person? Because there's a whole thing in these issues of Captain America so far where we keep skipping ahead large amounts of time. So Captain America has been in this other dimension now maybe for, 15 years? This issue starts 11 years later after the events of the previous issue, which I was sure when I saw the end of this previous issue that we were in store for some immediate kind of action, as Captain America found Arnim Zola's face on his own chest, implanted on him by some kind of virus. But no, after this revelation we then skip 11 years ahead. And I can see why you might want to make kind of a story of survival go on for years and years and years. And another thing that I think Rick Remender's wanting to do is turn Captain America into a father. So he's ended up raising this kid, who's actually one of Arnim Zola's kids, but doesn't know it, as his own child. So we get little touches of fatherhood, although I don't feel like we get a whole lot. This skipping ahead through time also makes it feel like we're kind of summarizing large amounts of events rather than experiencing them along with Captain America. But the other thing is, when I read issue 1 and he initially escapes from Arnim Zola and has stolen this child, I expected him to, I expected us to see Captain America go into action right away and take charge. And now it's like 15 years later and he's still not really a take charge person. He's just a surviving person. And it's kind of cool, having to survive in this other dimension and everything. It might be kind of a cool adventure for a different kind of hero, but for Captain America it just doesn't make sense to me that he wouldn't have long since sort of rallied an army and taken on Zola and found whatever was needed to accomplish his task. I mean, instead we have kind of a sort of passive, struggling to survive Captain America, who just barely, is like a parent who's having trouble doing well by his kid or whatever. So I think the art is fantastic, actually, in the science fiction parts at times by Romita, and really by his inker and colorist. The colorist, does a lot of heavy lifting here to make it just have a real kind of painterly science fiction-y kind of feel. With a lot of these Marvel, I go back to a video, he probably doesn't even remember doing it, where Mark over in England, MAW0001, talked about Marvel Comics art being more like heavy metal now. And I go back to that a lot. A lot of these comics, if you were to time travel, from the days of heavy metal in the late 70s and early 80s to now, you'd say, oh my God, all the art in Marvel Comics, or a lot of the art in Marvel Comics, could have appeared in Heavy Metal magazine. I don't think the stories to some degree are a little more like Heavy Metal, like here, this wild, bizarro science fiction world. So I really have hats off to the colorist and to John Romita and his inker for what they accomplish here in the science fiction scenes. but ultimately, it's like I'm reading an interesting science fiction comic book, but am I reading an interesting Captain America comic book? And maybe, you know, in a few more issues, Remender will turn me around and say, oh yeah, now I get it, and this really is like a Captain America comic. But right now, I'm not seeing that. So, you know, with one part of my brain, I can say, oh, I'm enjoying this. It's a great science fiction comic, minus all the flashback scenes to his childhood. And on another part of my brain is saying, well, hey, this isn't Captain America. This isn't Captain America. You know, it's a reboot of him, I guess. But what's the vision of Captain America? Who is he now? I've heard Remender say that these flashbacks are supposed to help define him more. But I think the flashbacks are just an attempt to make some touchstone with Captain America in his past while doing just this wild science fiction story. I'm definitely enjoying the ride, and it's one of the better books. I'm happy getting a subscription to it. Because through the subscriptions I pay about $2.25. And in fact, I've renewed Captain America, and with the renewal I get it for about $2 a piece. But would I buy this, you know, for $3.99 minus my 15% discount at my comic book store? I think probably not. I just wait for the trade. And that's the other thing. This story is clearly written for the trade. You don't get a sense of a full sort of chapter with each issue. You just get a little bit more forward. I think supposedly, is it going to finish up in issue 5? I'll believe it when I see it, or maybe not. Anyway, so it's a cool book, but is it a Captain America book? I don't know. And then a bigger question mark for me is the Indestructible Hulk. I have a lot of faith in Mark Waid. I've enjoyed a number of his comic books, particularly Insufferable and his current run on Daredevil. He did a great job on Rocketeer. And I know there are older books by him that I've liked, but those are the ones that stand out to me right now. And on Incredible Hulk, he has this great idea of Bruce Banner working for S.H.I.E.L.D. and offering to let them use Hulk as kind of their secret weapon in return for giving him a chance to be a scientist again. And that's a great idea. S.H.I.E.L.D. is a lot of fun, or it used to be. And it just seems like a fun mix for mixing the Hulk and S.H.I.E.L.D. But I don't feel like Waid has found his way yet. I think he probably can, and there's lots of good little touches, but there's other stuff where it just doesn't feel like it's gelling. And I kind of has crossed my mind, you know, is Waid the right kind of writer for the Hulk? And some other people, I'm going to get his name wrong, one of the British fellows I think in particular, but have said how there isn't enough kind of a Hulk smash kind of feel, which is kind of what we all love about the Hulk. And part of the problem with that is the art, which everyone has talked about. Leinil Yu, his art looks beautiful in still shots, but as you're reading it, it's hard to feel the story. The storytelling isn't strong here. Maybe he isn't, you know, feeling something for the Hulk, but like in this battle here with Iron Man, I remember when I read this, I had a real trouble connecting what was actually happening, and I'm not really feeling the emotion that anyone has. You know, it looks good as you look at the individual pictures, but somehow as you read it, it doesn't read that well. So things could change radically when Walt Simonson comes on. I don't know how long Walt Simonson will be on it for. I mean, look at that. There's a beautiful cover by Leinil Yu. Maybe he should stay on doing covers. But it's very distancing, the artwork itself, and maybe the coloring only makes that worse. I don't know. It's too painterly looking. So it looks a bit like, you know, heavy metal might have looked, or, you know, something in heavy metal might have looked. So it fits that kind of theory. Yeah, look at that. That's beautiful, but somehow it just didn't click as a, it works as illustration, not as story. So, yeah, it just seems to have a lot of cool elements. You know, a nice thing about Marvel seems to be that they place a lot of faith in their writers. So hopefully they will let Mark Waid find his feet and they won't shuffle him off before he really does what he wants to do with the Hulk. So, you know, on the Hulk, would I be picking this up for $4? No. And do I want to continue getting it as a subscription the way I do? Probably, because of my faith in Waid. But when it comes time to resubscribe, which I probably have more time on this because I don't think it's coming out as frequently as some of them. When my 12 issues are up, I'll have to see how I feel at that point. And if I hadn't been doing it through a subscription, I probably would have bought maybe 2 issues and then said, well, I'll wait for the trade or something, unless I had a lot of spare change on me. So I think in the next video, I'll mostly talk about the Avengers. And but meanwhile, thanks for hanging with me. I hope you watch the next video on Marvel Now. I might even at the very end do one last video where I kind of do my Marvel versus DC as I see them right now. And I have to say, right now I'm trying harder and harder to get more Image comics. I want to support what's going on there, and that's interesting. So I have to think about how much money I spend on Marvel and DC, and is that keeping me from discovering exciting new comics. Anyway, talk to you all later.